Today, I am asking everyone to make a contribution.
Our current level of borrowing and debt interest payments is deeply unsustainable. It wasn't a pro-growth budget at all. Reeves is in grave danger of sparking a wage price spiral.
I'm proud to be Britain's first female Chancellor of the Exchequer.
She's wrong about a lot of things. If that's mansplaining, then we have no democracy.
Let me explain to the Chancellor, woman to woman. People out there aren't complaining because she's female. They're complaining because she is utterly incompetent.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. Thrilled as ever to be joined by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And no one we would rather be joined by on Budget Week. It's the economist and journalist, Liam Halligan. Liam, welcome.
Good to be with you guys.
People will know Liam as the Telegraph columnist, co-host of the Planet Normal podcast, and the man behind the essential When the Facts Change Substack, which you're now launching a show on, Liam. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, just overnight, Fraser and Tom, good to be with you. I've put together my first show. I've amassed a few Substack subscribers over recent months, just with some writing and a little bit of broadcasting. And now I'm going to do, the commitment is to a weekly show, which I'll be people asking to subscribe to. So I've got my own When the Facts Change studio now. I had a number of guests come through the studio and talk to me over the last 24 hours. Some pretty good guests. And I'm going to try and use the show every week to do the kind of interviews that I know there's a big demand out there for. So accessible, but high fiber, interesting, sustained interviews on economic, business and political issues. Because you know what? The UK is in a big economic predicament, and the vast majority of our media class, I'm afraid, and I say this with regret, is deeply economically illiterate. Not only are they economically illiterate, they disdain economic literacy. They think it's like rough. They think it's something that should be spurned by civilized people. Well, guess what? The Britain's public finances are not in great shape. There's an awful lot of fear out there among ordinary men and women, and they hear mainstream, often broadcast journalists opine about the economy, and they scream and shout at the radio saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to counter that trend.
And people can find that on the When the Facts Change Substack on there. That's the best way to
right.
find
Literally,
it.
when I stop talking to you guys, which is obviously always a pleasure, I'm going to press the button and publish my first show. And it will be via When the Facts Change Facebook, Twitter, and you can get access to the full show on my Substack.
Fantastic. And that's going to be absolutely essential viewing, I'm sure. So today, there's really nothing else we should be talking about. It's the budget. And it's the budget that we've all been dreading. Even Rachel Reeves has been dreading it to a certain extent. She's held it so late. I think it's the latest an autumn statement has been held in the past 10 years. Liam, do you just want to set out why things are so bad, why the outlook is so gloomy, and why Rachel Reeves has potentially only made things worse?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that, I believe in this country. I believe in the entrepreneurial vim and vigor of the British people from all parts of the world. I'm from an immigrant background, as you know, and I guess I've got the gratitude of the immigrant class, or the gratitude that the immigrant class should have when coming to a great country. I think this country has boundless potential. We have a huge amount going for us. And yet I think all that creativity and energy and enterprise and the deep inbred desire of so many British households and firms to better themselves and to do a good job is being thwarted now by economic policy. And it's not just Labour. Rachel Reeves inherited a situation in July 2024 where, of course, very unlike 1997, the majorities looked similar, though spiked viewers and listeners know the majorities are different in the sense that a lot of people voted for Blair, and only 1 in 5 of the electorate voted for Labour this time because the turnout was so low. So the majority looks the same, but the mandate is different. But in particular, the national debt in the 97, when Blair came in, was 35% of GDP. Now, when Reeves came in July 2024, is almost 90% of GDP. So it wasn't a good inheritance. The tax burden was already at a 70-year high when the Tories left office after 14 years. But she's made it a lot worse because Labour said in their election manifesto ahead of the July 2024 budget, the very light taxation. Actually, they've increased taxes. Fraser and Tom, last October, 40 billion, the most punitive budget in over 3 decades. This year, another 30 billion. These are massive increases, 70 billion in increase in annual taxation. That's equivalent to 9 pence on the basic rate of income tax. It's absolutely huge. And yet, despite all that extra cash coming in, she's also massively ramped up borrowing again. Yeah. It's in the fine print of this budget for all the prudence and, it's just rot. Because if you look at the numbers, and this is not very difficult, as long as you can do some simple addition and subtraction, you can find these numbers in the OBR's technical documents. Since last April, right? Since April, when the OBR did its forecast with Reeves' spring statement, borrowing has gone up by another 70 billion quid, right? Since April, over the next 5 years. And since the budget happened, I've not only been trying to get this show together, you're literally hanging pictures on walls and all kinds of madness. I've been, obviously talking to lots of people, podcasts and TV and radio and so on. I've also been in the City of London. My studio is right next to the City of London. It's literally a short walk from the square mile. And I've been talking to lots of people in the markets, and they've been talking to me. And this is the emerging fear. For now, the markets are calm. It's Thanksgiving. Bit of benefit of the doubt. Let it settle. Let's see what happens. But what the emerging concern is that all the pain over the next 5 years is pushed towards the next election. So from 2020 onwards, all the tax increases and fiscal consolidation, such as it is, and all the goodies, the extra borrowing, is now for the next 2 or 3 years. So Reeves, and then suddenly, according to OBR forecasts, after 3 or 4 years of massive extra borrowing, suddenly borrowing falls in 2029-30. How? Why? So over the next 3 to 4 years, we've got much lower growth assumptions from the OBR, right? But borrowing's gone up. Yeah. And it's just crazy. It's crazy. The economy isn't going to be able to sustain that extra borrowing without borrowing even more. So we've got a situation where Labour has U-turned in the sense that it has slightly tempered for now, though there's still going to be lots more parliamentary conflict. The ridiculous employment rights bill, which gives people claims to unfair dismissal from day one, which is a charter for vexatious employees to just try and rip off companies. Of course, a lot of employees are very, very good, but quite a few employees aren't. Quite a few employees are really opportunistic, just as quite a lot of employers are very, very good, but some are opportunistic. So we need legislation that balances. Angela Rayner's trade union written employment rights bill goes way off the deep end. It just drives the UK labour market into a corner and will lead to a lot less hiring and an increase in unemployment. And the Labour front bench finally, after even the Resolution Foundation, which is, the kind of taxi rank for waiting Labour advisors and ministers to come in, even the Resolution Foundation, which is, a pretty hard left economic outfit, has been publicly warning the Labour front bench that this employment rights bill is going to be deeply counterproductive for workers because there'll just be fewer jobs. So the picture is lots of rhetoric about prudence at the dispatch box, actually huge risks being taken with borrowing. That extra borrowing could easily cause big financial turmoil, particularly if inflation goes up, and that could happen for reasons that we can discuss. Yes, the Labour front bench has tried to temper the extremely expansionist tendencies of this budget, and I would say the deep fiscal irresponsibility of this budget by reining in the Employment Rights Bill. That may not happen in the end because there's lots of parliamentary ping pong going on between the Lords and the Commons with that flagship legislation. And so that's where we are. And in general, while I think a lot of people out there like me are big believers in the British economy, you know, we're the kind of people who like to think we're going to stay, we're going to do our best for ourselves, our family. We love this country. The natural enterprise of the British people is now being systematically corralled by government policy. It started under the Tories and it's really jacked up under Labour.
And Liam, I mean, a lot of people will be scratching their heads thinking, we're being taxed all this money, the government is spending all this money, what the hell is it going into? Because it's certainly not going into growth-raising measures. People don't feel as if their public services are improving. Is this mostly to do with runaway welfare spending, things like that? I mean, where does the public spending element come into this? Why has that got out of control so badly?
Firstly, it's being spent on the state itself, the state for its own sake. You know, the blob. We've got a third more civil servants than we had in 2016. Absolutely insane. What about email? What about AI? What about labour-saving devices? You know, even though we've got a third more civil servants and public sector productivity has absolutely plunged, you know, it generally is not more efficient to work from home. Sorry, you know, a lot of state-sponsored employees say it is, but it just isn't. And we need to organise ourselves to change that. It can work in some circumstances, and it can be a brilliant way of helping people, particularly people who want to stay at home and look after kids, which is the most beautiful, natural thing that you could do, you know, to navigate the difficulties of being in and out of the labour market. It's a good kind of transition thing. You know, some jobs it works really well, but quite a lot of jobs it doesn't, particularly customer-facing jobs. You know, you try getting a state-run body or ministry or institution to pick up the phone. You know, it's really, really difficult. So a lot of the money's going to the blob. A lot of the money's going in public sector wage rises, which have been big. Average public sector pay is well above average private sector pay. And public sector workers, of course, enjoy unimaginable benefits compared to private sector workers, sick leave, maternity leave, all kinds of, you know, soft focus treatment, all kinds of, you know, sabbaticals, entitlements, as well as gold-plated, index-linked, massive public sector pensions, which again are completely and utterly unaffordable and out to lunch. You have public sector workers, some of them, they are literally receiving the pension for more years than they're working because the pension ages kick in so early. That is a system that was built for a different time and a different demography, and we desperately need to reform it. It is going to literally cripple this nation's finances. Public sector pensions, not the state pension, it's public sector pensions of state workers. And yet every single person in the public sector who decides policy on public sector pensions, you know, ministers, officials, civil servants, they all have public sector pensions. So of course they're not going to change anything. And the rest of us have to get really, really angry about this pensions apartheid, because it is literally, you know, a third to a half of your council tax, right, goes on people's public sector pensions. Wow. That's why your bins aren't collected so often. That's why your council tax is going to the moon, because of public sector pensions. So you've got that's happening. And then, of course, you've got, you know, Labour are doing what Labour do. Blair tried to do something different, but yeah, they are just literally throwing money at the public services as an end in itself, with no stipulations for reforms or anything like that. NHS waiting lists are absolutely huge, 7-8 million people. They've come down a bit, but that's only because people in desperation, and when they can't even afford it, go private. Whip rounds. In my own community, I've seen whip rounds in pubs. I've seen families desperately clubbing together. Kids being taken out of independent school with the VAT rises so people can have operations that they've paid for many times over on the NHS and they can't get them. And then, of course, there's a waiting list to get on the waiting list. So the NHS is in a difficult state, even though loads more money is being thrown at it without stipulations for reform, probably because loads more money is being thrown at it without stipulations for reform. So we lack, and we have lacked, it's not just Labour, but it's worse under Labour, the kind of political and institutional and intellectual grit to reform these massive public sector behemoths. Guess what? The NHS is not the best in the world. Right? I'm not having a go at individual people. It's not the best in the world. Look at the numbers. The OECD numbers show clearly, and for many years, we are absolutely at the bottom of the OECD advanced countries league table for outcomes for the big three: oncology, stroke, heart disease. The NHS performs diabolically. And yet, that is just one example, but it's a big example of where endless state money is seen as the end in itself rather than a means to an end. And I'm afraid all parties have been guilty of that. We need proper reform of our state. We need to take on these massive vested interests. And quite frankly, the often cosseted media, particularly the broadcast media, private healthcare and all the rest of it, often wealthy people making decisions in newsrooms that the rest of the country think are insane. Unless we create a climate where you can have these discussions and not be dismissed as some kind of evil person, these responsible discussions about the size of the state, then I'm afraid Britain's public finances are going to remain at sea, getting worse. And what's unsustainable will not be sustained. And our current level of borrowing and debt interest payments, is deeply unsustainable. And so something has to give. And Rachel Reeves, Eddie Dempsey, the head of the RMT, said at the Durham Miners Gala, I love those trade union galas. I often go to them, by the way, have a look around, talk to people. And I've actually got a lot of friends in the trade union movement, and they're doing some really good analysis on a lot of things, particularly net zero. You want to talk to the GMB net zero. But Eddie Dempsey,
they're furious with it.
Eddie Dempsey said at the Durham Miners Gala this summer, who elected the markets? Not me. Who runs this country, the markets or us? Utter madness. What is Eddie Dempsey saying? What is Andy Burnham saying when he says we don't want to be in hock to the bond markets? That we default? What are you saying, guys? Now, Rachel Reeves historically pushes back on those people, right? She stands at the dispatch box looking very, authoritative. And I did think her delivery was good, by the way, on Wednesday. Fair play to her. She's obviously under enormous pressure. I wish her no personal ill will at all. It's a really difficult job. I just think she's wrong about a lot of things. And if that's mansplaining, then we have no democracy. That we have no democracy, because I'm sorry I'm a man, but that's what I happen to think based on, decades of professional economic experience and policy making experience. And by the way, lots and lots of women I know think the same thing. So Rachel Reeves stands at the dispatch box and she pushes back against, the likes of Eddie Dempsey and her own backbenchers who are sort of, sixth form politicians saying, forget the markets, just spend the money. We're always right. She pushes back against that. And yet, if you look at the numbers, Rachel, you just increased borrowing by 75 billion and you've just increased taxation by 30 billion. What's going on?
Yeah. And I want to look at the other side of the ledger as well, because the other thing dragging us into this doom loop is not just the out of control public spending, but of course, pretty much stagnant growth. Maybe we would be able to make these unsustainable spending commitments if we had a roaring dynamic economy. Rachel Reeves has promised to deliver growth consistently. I listened to her big growth speech earlier this year. I counted the use of the word 50 times. But while they keep saying they want growth, and Keir Starmer says he has a laser-like focus on growth, where are the measures to deliver it? And we're not seeing results, certainly.
I agree with you, Fraser. It wasn't a pro-growth budget at all. The most pro-growth thing that's happened in the last 48 hours is Labour signalling they may be willing to water down the extremely punitive back to the 1970s Employment Rights Bill by removing those utterly counterproductive and actually anti-worker unfair dismissal rights from day one. Look, employers just won't take people on. But by signalling they may be willing, after lobbying from many of the party's friends, that was a broadly pro-growth or a dilution of a deeply anti-growth measure. That's one thing. It won't generate growth that the minimum wage, having gone up 7% in April, is about to go up by another 4.1%. And those numbers for 18 to 20-year-olds, by the way, are both double-digit percentage increases. Right?
Wow.
Now, what will that do? If you think that's going to make young people better off, you have no understanding of economics. I mean, really, this is A-level economics. Not even. Because what will happen is those young people and low-income workers in general just won't be taken on. Employers won't take them on. And if they do take them on, those extra costs will go straight through to prices that consumers pay. And Reeves is in grave danger of sparking a wage price spiral. What is a wage price spiral? Again, it's there aren't many laws in economics, right?
Yeah.
But one of them is if that you keep pushing up administratively wages and business costs, you're going to push up inflation, and then that's going to, push up wage demands and, idiotic politicians just pushing up the minimum wage even more. And you end up with a self-reinforcing spiral. This is as old as the hills. This is the wisdom that we've accumulated over many decades of hard knocks and deeply damaging, and costly, experience. And yet she just keeps jacking up the minimum wage. So again, the economically illiterate Labour backbenchers say, what business pays minimum wages? Business has to bear these costs, and that's just going to spark inflation. And this brings us back to the bond market, right? So what really winds up the bond market? What really winds up markets, accredited? What really means that the big institutional investors, the insurance companies, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds that lend serious governments serious money around the world, and it's a completely global market, when they see inflation coming down the track, they will push up yields, right? They will demand higher yields, because they want compensation for that inflation if they're borrowing, if they're lending money for 10 years or 30 years. Bad politics pushes up gilt yields, and concerns about growth pushes up gilt yields under some circumstances. But what really does it is inflation. And we are now in danger, having loaded loads of extra borrowing on the government's balance sheet, with extra taxation only coming, in 2 years before a general election. That's not going to happen. And then on top of that, you have this danger of inflation, right? For now, inflation is 3.6%. But guess what? We are still an inflation outlier in the G7. Our inflation is still almost double the Bank of England's 2% target. It's bang on target in the Eurozone. It's 2%. American inflation is quite a lot lower than ours, even though America's had tariffs, which are inherently inflationary. And America's out on its own anyway. It's got a reserve currency. It's got a massively mighty, geopolitically vital national balance sheet. Forget America. You can't compare yourself to America. You just can't. But we have got an inflation problem, and now we've got a slow growth problem, right? The market sensed that. And now Reeves has loaded lots of extra borrowing on the balance sheet, and she's done it without bringing the taxation in to justify that borrowing, or the growth measures to justify that borrowing. And the taxation only comes much later. So if inflation goes up, all those concerns are going to immediately come into focus, right? Now, why might inflation go up, Fraser? Well, the oil price, as we speak, is like 25% down year to date. It's like $65 a barrel, which is low historically, right? And we're a massive oil importer, by the way. We're a massive energy importer. We're a massive food importer as well. And the danger is, a lot of the reason the oil price is low is because the global economy is quite sluggish still. And crucially, because the internal politics of OPEC, right? OPEC, the exporters cartel, is having an internal row where the big countries, the likes of the Saudis and the others, are trying to force the smaller OPEC countries not to cheat on their quotas. You know, the top and bottom of that is that OPEC is deliberately, for now, keeping oil prices lower than they otherwise would be in order to punish its smaller members who have been overproducing on their quotas in order to try and make more money, right? It's trying to squeeze the more recalcitrant, stroppy, smaller OPEC members. Once all that politics unwinds and OPEC takes oil prices back, I mean, these guys still control 40% of the supplies and 80% of global reserves, right? If anyone tells you OPEC isn't important, right, they're smoking dope. They don't understand geopolitics at all. We want to wish OPEC wasn't important anymore, but it still is. If anyone tells you that oil isn't important, well, first oil price shock in 1973, which totally remade the political and economic map of the world. Yeah, America's cars suddenly got smaller overnight. Back then, we used 50 million barrels of oil a day, right? Now we use 100. So if oil's less important, why are we using twice as much of it?
Yeah.
It's just the truth. And oil is absolutely vital in inflation outlooks, particularly of oil importing and energy importing and food importing countries that have their own very, 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 very expensive energy domestically. And so we are very, 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 very susceptible to an increase in oil prices, which will feed directly into our inflation. And once inflation starts to look toppy and peaky again, and this idea that's emerged over last 6 months or so that the UK has an inflation problem and is an inflation outlier, that idea will then be galvanized in the minds of financial markets. It will become, it will become the trade, man, short sterling. It will become the trade. And that's the danger. And I'm afraid my concern is that no one in Downing Street understands anything that I've just said.
Well, that's a very worrying outlook, but always really important to get your analysis there, Liam. I'm so grateful to have you on the show. Obviously, people should check out your When the Facts Change show, which will be out now by the time people are viewing this. And also you can join myself and Tom Slater over on Spike Podcast Unlocked, where we'll be discussing a bit more of the budget and the smears against Nigel Farage, the claims that he was racist as a schoolboy.
Rather than talking about the decades that Nigel Farage has been in public life, in politics, where you can agree, disagree, criticise or praise him, we suddenly have to boil this down to what he may or may not have said while he was barely out of short trousers.
Thank you all for watching, and thank you, Liam.
Thank you, Fraser. Thanks for having me, and all the best to Spiked.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.